When we think about success in today's fast-moving world, one question stands out. What truly sets great organizations apart? Is it strategy? Is it timing? Or is it the ability to make the right decisions when it matters most? At the University of Manchester, these questions are not just explored, they are challenged, tested, and transformed into real world impact. In this exclusive masterclass led by our esteemed professor, we dive into the economics of strategy, unpacking how strategic decision making shapes competitive advantage in today's complex business landscape. This is more than a theory. It's about understanding how business win, why some fall behind, and how leaders like you can make smarter, sharper, and more confident decisions. If you ever wondered how to turn insight into action or how to build a strategy that truly stands out, this is your starting point. When we think about success in today's fast moving world, one question stands out, and this is where the organizations apart. A very good evening to everyone, and welcome to the University of Manchester, Dubai. In the masterclass series that in store for everybody, my name is Josin Ranyola. It is a pleasure to have all you joining us today. This series is designed to give you a real taste of thinking, of conversations, and the insights that shape today's global business leaders, and today's session is no exception. So, before we begin, let's make a moment to explore the University of Manchester not just as a university, but as a dynamic city, a world class institution, and a truly global network shaping ideas, innovation, and impact across the world. Committed to world class research, outstanding teaching and learning experience, and unwavering social responsibility, the University of Manchester has a long standing legacy of excellence, not just in education, but in shaping the world as we know it. Part of the prestigious Russell Group and one of the UK's largest, most respected universities, established in 1824, a long, successful 200 years of making a difference in the world. We're also the home to 26 Nobel Prize winners and to the groundbreaking discoveries from splitting the atom to the discovery of graphene. Today, that legacy continues to be recognized globally, ranked among the top universities in the UK, Europe, and the world. And when it comes to business education, our MBA stands amongst the elite, triple accredited by AMBA, AACSB, and EQUIS, placing us in less than 1% of all the business schools in the world. But beyond the rankings, the recognition, and the accolades, what truly defines Manchester is its commitment to developing individuals who don't just adapt to change, but lead it. The University of Manchester also has consistently led the way in the global higher education, not just through academic excellence, but through its real world impact. Since the ranking began in 2019, the University of Manchester has been standout performer. In fact, we are proud to be the only university globally to have ranked in the top 10 every single year, first in the UK, first in Europe, and second in the world, a reflection of our long term commitment to creating positive social and environmental change. Here in the Middle East, the University of Manchester opened in Dubai Knowledge Park in 2006. And today we are proudly celebrating our 20 years of excellence stronger together. Our community is truly global with over 112 nationalities, more than 2,600 graduates, and over 3,700 students supported. We're also connected to the thriving network of 5,000 plus alumni, actively fostering meaningful professional connections across the region. As the largest and fastest growing international hub within the Alliance Manchester Business Schools global network, we are part of a truly international presence with centers in cities such as Shanghai, Hong Kong, Singapore, and of course our home campus in Manchester. We offer a range of programs, including MSc Financial Management, MA in Educational Leadership and Practice. We do have the Global Part-Time MBA, of course, the Executive MBA, and Executive Education, designed to support professionals at every stage of their journey. And most recently, the University of Manchester, Dubai has achieved a significant milestone, being granted institutional licensure by the UAE Ministry of Higher Education and full program accreditation by the Commission for Academic Accreditation, a proud moment and a testament to our continued commitment to excellence. I mentioned this earlier. The University of Manchester executive education programs are designed for managers and leaders, delivered through intensive face to face session over 4 to 5 days in Manchester. Participants can take courses individually with the option to earn a Manchester Professional Diploma in Leadership after completing 4 courses, and each course also provide a digital badge. Program fees range from about 3,990 to 5,490 starting pounds, with a current 15% discount available on all executive education courses. This is the upcoming next quarter courses being offered. If you're interested, I'll give you time to scan the QR code in front of your computer at the moment. Good. So now, to guide us through this, we are joined by someone who brings both academic excellence and real world perspective. And now let's meet our special guest. He's a senior lecturer in strategy and competition at Alliance Manchester Business School, the University of Manchester. He also serves as course director, teaching strategy and competitive analysis to experienced professionals across global cohorts. With extensive experience in executive education, he has worked with leading international organizations focusing on strategic decision making, competitive positioning, and business growth. Combining academic insight with real world application, he specializes in helping leaders navigate complexity and build sustainable competitive advantage. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to welcome Professor Paul Patton. Professor?
Thanks, Justin, and good evening to everybody present on the webinar. It's a great pleasure again to conduct a masterclass in Dubai. Today, I will be focusing in on strategic decision making and competitive advantage. In a broad sense, I want to start off by asking, what is strategy? And I'm sure you can Google it and get multiple reasons as to what is strategy, multiple frameworks, multiple theories. But at the end of the day, whatever strategy you adopt, you're trying to achieve some objective, some goal within your organization that can lead to business success, efficiency, effectiveness, and the economical use of your scarce resources, hopefully leading to very positive financial performance. Within the strategy and competition, we look at multiple objectives, multiple goals that can be pursued by organizations. From the traditional approach of profit maximization to the idea of sales revenue maximization to growth maximization. It could be a combination of the above, or it could be some other goals, like you may work in a charitable organization and your goal is simply to break even. If you think of low-cost airlines, let's look at Fly Dubai or Air Arabia. Let's look at Europe at the case of Ryanair or EasyJet. You would look at their strategies more in terms of sales revenue maximization, where they're willing to maybe sacrifice short-run profits in order to maximize the sales revenue that they achieve from maximizing number of passengers that they can fly on their aircraft. And a key signal to sales revenue maximization is that they try to charge or to offer the lowest price possible to their customers. If you look at Apple, Apple definitely is a growth maximizer, trying to have a significant product diversification, offering you a significant amount of hardware, software, services, all complementary products within their integrated ecosystem. Again, in order to maximize the growth within the company, and in turn maximizing the success of the company in terms of market cap and the overall financial performance. At the end of the day, in strategy and competition, and what we do in the module with students in this module and in various workshops is to really ask you to consider not only in global companies but also within your own company that you work for, what type of strategy do you try to execute? And really, in order to answer that question, what type of strategy do you execute? You're really trying to answer three fundamental questions. Is how do you go about establishing a competitive advantage in a certain time period T, maybe 2026? How do you then sustain a competitive advantage in time T plus one into the future? But not only that, how can you assure that you have an appropriate competitive advantage that aligns with your organization's purpose, your organization's mission, your organization's vision? Maybe you have corporate social responsibility goals that you want to ensure you achieve as well. So if you think of your own organization and try to answer those three fundamental questions, the establishment and sustaining, and how appropriate in terms of how do you go about executing various strategies in order to achieve competitive advantage. And as Jack Welch said, if you don't have a competitive advantage, don't compete because you will fail to your near rival companies who will be more successful than you and outperform you in all sorts of key performance indicators. So at the end of the day, in your business context, you are trying to execute a business competitive strategy. And as Michael Porter said, it's not necessarily being better than your competitors, but it's a matter of being different than your competitors. So the question I ask you is what does your organization do that is different than your competitors? So if you had that 1 minute in the lift and you were trying to explain that elevator pitch in 1 minute, what would you say to somebody that would indicate that your product or your service is significantly different than their competitors? So you try to entice them to purchase your product or service. So again, what does your organization do that is different to your competitors? And in order to help you to answer that question, we can look at several strategic choices related to price competition and non-price competition. Now, in reality, a lot of companies try to avoid direct price competition because it may lead to price wars, which are costly. So a lot of organizations tend to focus more on non-price competitive strategies. Even Starbucks, Apple, etc., Adidas, they compete more on the non-price competitive strategies compared to price strategies. So we focus therefore on ideas around product innovation, process service innovation, business innovation, or maybe a combination of these. So perhaps you basically distinguish yourself. You are different. Your product or service is different because it may offer some of these unique characteristics that is better than your actual competitor. Maybe you would argue that your product gives you better quality. Maybe it's easier or safer to use. Maybe it's a better design. Maybe you offer faster delivery. Maybe you have a much wider range of products compared to your competitors. Maybe you have better location that is easier for your customers to access your purchase, etc. A better website online presence. So again, think of your own organization. Think of that question. What makes your product or service different than your actual competitors? Makes it much better than your competitors. Think of that 1 minute elevator pitch. What would you say about your product or service to entice your customers to purchase that product or service? So if you look at Tesla's strategy, for example, Tesla's strategy is not just about making electric vehicles, but Tesla's strategy is the integration of technology, the integration of infrastructure like its gigafactories, the integration of brand perception in order to give it that competitive edge. But therein lies the problem because BYD and Volkswagen, etc., are also trying to catch up on and duplicate what Tesla is doing. And over time, you've seen that Tesla has lost some of its competitive edge, especially to the likes of BYD and other players within the electric vehicle market. But once we look at the idea that your competitors are watching what you're doing, we now get into the whole area of strategic interdependence, and we can explain some of this strategic interdependence through applications of ideas within game theory. So there's no doubt about it. We live in a strategic, interdependent world. There's no doubt about it that my actions within my company are being watched by other companies, and other companies will introduce counter strategies to my strategies. This is the action and the reaction. First of all, we have to understand what is the competitive environment in which we operate. Who are our competitors? Okay. What is their market share positions? Who is the nearest rival? That is the rival that will always copy our strategies with counter strategies. And in strategy and competition, we have various tools like the conjectural variation matrix analysis that help us to understand the near rival player. So, for example, who is Starbucks' near rival player in the United States of America? Who is Starbucks' near rival player in China? Probably in China, it's Luckin Coffee, but maybe in America, it could be Dunkin' or Mac Cafe. So we use some tools of analysis to help us determine who our near rival player is. And then do you know the likely reaction of your near rival when you introduce various price and non-price strategies? And this is where strategic interdependence and game theory comes in to help us understand how our competitors will react to some of our price and non-price actions. So, for example, if I was to reduce the price by 10%, how would my rival respond? Would they reduce their price by 10%, or maybe only 5%, or maybe they mightn't change their price at all? So let's assume they do reduce their price by 10%. Then what would my reply be? How would I actually react to that? And this is where game theory brings in those type of ideas. So for example, if I apply that to the video console market, just taking 2000 to 2006 as a period of time. In the 26th of October 2000, Sony introduces the new PlayStation 2 at $299. There is noise within the sector because Microsoft has indicated that it is interested in entering into the video console market. It has employed new technicians, new software developers, etc., and they enter into this market with the Xbox on the 15th of November 2001 at the same matching price. So it indicates that they have a good intention to really try to make a mark within this particular market segment. Sony reacts to that entry several months later on the 14th of May 2002 by dropping the price of the PlayStation to $199.99. However, the very next day, you have Microsoft coming in and responding and dropping the price and undercutting by 99 cents, $199. Does Sony react again? They do, but not till a year later, until the 13th of May 2003, they dropped the price again to $179.99. And you can see then that Xbox is dropped in price the very next day to 179. So already you can begin to observe patterns of behavior happening here. You can observe that Sony tends to change its prices May of the years, and that the speed of reaction coming from Microsoft is much quicker than the reaction coming from Sony. Notice then in 2004, because up as far as at this point, it was Microsoft that was following Sony's price reduction. So in 2004, Microsoft moves first. It decides to initiate a price reduction on the 29th of March, dropping the price to $149. Does Sony react the next day on the 30th of March? No. Sony sticks to tradition. It doesn't react to the 11th of May 2004, drops the price to 149.99, still 99 cents above that of Microsoft Xbox. So you can definitely see a pattern of price competition happening there. You could argue that is a price war. And if I just jump over here for a moment, what you're seeing here is Turing patterns. After Alan Turing, the famous mathematician who was employed by the Ministry of Defense in the UK during the Second World War to try to break the German Enigma code. It's a film called The Imitation Game. It's worth looking at that because it looks at this whole idea of can you identify patterns of behavior in the actual code that the Germans are using. And if you can identify that pattern of behavior, then you can manipulate and use that pattern of behavior to your competitive advantage. So, do you know the pattern of behavior of your near rivals? Have you done an analysis of that pattern of behavior in order to determine how the speed of which they may react to some of your strategic decisions, the magnitude of their reactions, etc. Because you can very simply here plot the actual Turing price pattern within that game, and you can that's the pattern you see. And from that, you have a number of observations. There's an opening symmetric move of 299,299. You can see the 50% price decrease from the beginning to the end of this price competition. And by the way, that same pattern of behavior was repeated if you looked at the same analysis in 2010 and 2050 between Sony's PlayStation and Microsoft's Xbox. So just going back there, this price war game is costing money. So what the two companies, Sony and Microsoft, have decided to do is to start a new game, a continued competition, but the competition is in form of non-price competition. So what you have now on the 30th of October 2005, you have announcements being made about capacity that Xbox or Microsoft's going to ship 22 million Xboxes. But look how quickly Sony responds. Say, forget about your 22 million. We're going to basically ship 100 million PlayStations. On the 22nd of November 2005, Microsoft comes up and launches the Xbox 360. And note it launches in the Xbox 360 at a much higher price. It's a common feature of price wars that during the price war, prices fall, as you saw from 299 to 149. and after the price war, to try to recoup some of the lower profits or some of the losses and charge a much higher price. But there's something else going on here because around this time you had observed in your research that Sony was trying to develop its own Blu-ray technology rather than purchasing Blu-ray technology from competitors such as Toshiba, etc. So, unfortunately for Sony, it failed initially to launch that Blu-ray technology. That meant it delayed the launch of the eventual launch of the PlayStation 3 that didn't happen till 2007. And notice when the PlayStation 3 was launched in 2007, it was launched at a much higher price of $499 as well. So that there is known as a critical timeline. So in the workshops in strategy and competition, uh, the students work in groups. They're given various companies like maybe Netflix or Adidas or Volkswagen or Tesla, Starbucks, etc. And they're asked to develop a critical timeline for that company over the last 6 years and try to see can they identify patterns of behavior, be it price competition or non-price competition, across the last decade or so, and then see can they use that information to predict how competition within this sector will materialize into the future. So, in order to do all of this type of analysis, we use various strategic tools like transaction cost economics, game theory, and the resource-based view of the firm. Now, what is game theory? Game theory is simply a theoretical framework. It's where we use mathematical modeling in order to allow us to analyze the actions, the reactions that take place, as you saw there in the critical timeline between Sony and Microsoft. And you can look at various games through the use of the application of game theory, games where there's conflict between the players, games where there's cooperation between players. Think of it, even though Renault and Nissan compete for your customer to you'll buy their separate cars, yet Renault and Nissan and Mitsubishi have a partnership where approximately 40% of all the technology in their respective cars is developed by a joint partnership. Where you have competition and where you have collaboration between players, that is known as co-opetition. In order to analyze a game, all you need is three elements. What are the players? Who are the players? What strategies are they executing? And what are the payoffs from those strategies? And then, in order to solve the game, we look at the concept of Nash equilibrium. And Nash equilibrium is that no player will have an incentive to change his or her current strategy given the strategies of other players. So it's that point at which you are getting the best outcome. A dominant strategy is that strategy that you will adopt regardless of the strategies that other players adopt. And then your games could be a simultaneous game or a sequential game. In the business world, most games are sequential games, like a game of chess. One player moves a pawn, the other player sees that and then decides on a counter reactive move. Games can be cooperative games and non-cooperative games. However, one has to be very, very careful with cooperative games in that they could lead you into all sorts of illegal activity where there might be illegal business practices, where companies might decide jointly to share market share, etc. And that may get the attention of the competition authorities in the local jurisdiction, be it the European Commission or be it the Justice Department in the United States of America, etc. That's what you want to avoid being basically investigated by any of the competition authorities who are arguing that the market in which you operate exhibits illegal business practices. And then you have a zero sum game is where if I gain 10%, then somebody else has to lose 10%. And a non-zero sum game is the opposite, where more than likely there may be positive outcomes, more positive outcomes, overall positive outcomes in the particular game. In order just to apply this, and this is one of many, many games that we outline in game theory, you can see here that we're looking at two players, Air Arabia and Fly Dubai. You know they're low cost airlines. They have strategies of charging a high price or low price, and player two can charge a high price or low price. In each cell, you'll see there's two numbers representing the level of revenue. These are sales revenue maximizing players. The first 100 relates to the revenue for Air Arabia. The second 100 relates to the revenue for Fly Dubai. And to solve this game, we solve for Nash equilibrium and dominant strategy. So the best way to do it is break the game up into component parts. So if we look here at the payoffs for Air Arabia player one, and we ask ourselves the question, if player two, Fly Dubai, was to charge a high price, what is the best strategy for Air Arabia, player one? The best strategy would be 120 there, because 120 in revenue is better than 100 million in revenue. On the other hand, if Fly Dubai was to charge a low price, what is the best strategy for Air Arabia? Well, making losses of minus 20 or getting profits of 50, you can see here that it is 50. So you can see here that Air Arabia will have a dominant strategy always to charge low price, regardless of what Fly Dubai does. So regardless of high price or low price charged by Fly Dubai, Air Arabia has a dominant strategy to go for low price. Equally, you can see that Fly Dubai will have a dominant strategy for low price because if Air Arabia goes high price, what is the best strategy? You now go across horizontally for Fly Dubai. 100 or 120 is 120. If Air Arabia went for low price, what's the best strategy for Fly Dubai? It's minus 20 or 50, so it's 50. So again, you can see the Fly Dubai has a dominant strategy of a low price. Now you can see that low price is the dominant strategy of Air Arabia and Fly Dubai, and you'd expect that outcome. And if I put the likes of Ryanair and EasyJet here in Europe, you'd expect the outcome that they are sales revenue maximizers and they compete on basically low prices. That's their low price strategy execution. Now, you might ask yourself, would is 50-50 a Nash equilibrium? Yes, it is, because you ask yourself, does, say, Air Arabia have an incentive to move from low price, where it earns 50 million, to a high price where it earns a loss of minus 20? Well, it wouldn't have an incentive to move from low price at 50. And equally, you might ask yourself, does Fly Dubai have an incentive to move from 50 to minus 20 by changing its strategy from low price to high price? No, because it'd be worse off. So 50-50 is not only dominant strategy, but also Nash equilibriums. Now, you might ask yourself, well, why isn't high price the outcome? Because it's much better, giving you 100 million profits each. Yes, that's true. However, this high price could be seen as illegal from a competition authority point of view. It can be seen as a legal business practice, plus the fact that it is not necessarily a sustainable point because there's always an incentive to cheat on this particular strategy. So, for example, if I was Air Arabia, I can see by cheating, by changing my strategy from high price to low price, I can go from 100 to 120. And player two, Fly Dubai, says, well, I can actually cheat on this agreement and I can improve from 100 to 120 over here. So this is not necessarily a stable outcome here. It will only exist if there is high trust between these two players here, player one and player two. As I said, you can apply this across the board. And in strategy and competition, we then start applying that to other games like non-price games of advertising or non-price games of innovation, etc. So, giving you an example of a different game, a non-price game of advertising, you can see here is a slightly different outcome here because in this particular case here, if Pepsi was to advertise, Coke will advertise because they'll get the most profit, 10 compared to 6. If Pepsi was to advertise, Coke would advertise because 13 is better than 11. However, over here, so you can see that Coke therefore has a dominant strategy to advertise. But if you look at Coke, if it advertises, what will Pepsi do? 5 is better than 2, so Pepsi would advertise. But if Coke does not advertise, Pepsi would not advertise. So Pepsi here does not have a dominant strategy. However, we say that Coke's advertised strategy dominates that of Pepsi's. So they'll end up in this situation here of 10-5, where Coke will advertise, Pepsi will advertise in the Olympic Games. That is also a Nash equilibrium because you can see here, Coke here won't change its strategy because 6 down here is worse than 10. And Pepsi won't change its strategy because the 2 over here is worse than the 5 here. So we do a lot of kind of games that allow you to analyze the strategic interdependence. This is only a flavor of some of them. And then we can apply a lot of this to various game shows. Like this is the Split or Steal game show. Okay, and in this particular game, and you can have a look at the video of this in your own time. But in this particular game, what happens is first of all, the dominant strategy is 0-0. Steal, steal is a dominant strategy. And in this particular game, what happens is that Nick decides that he's going to tell Abraham in the game show that he is going to steal. And it doesn't matter what Abraham says, Nick says, I'm going to steal, I'm going to steal. But if you're Abraham, you have a dilemma because irrespective of what you do, split or steal, you're going to end up with zero of winnings. However, what Nick does, Nick decides not only to tell Abraham that I'm going to steal, but I will also share my winnings with you. Now, there's no contractual obligation on Nick to share his winnings, but this is the idea of the pirate puzzle, the Dark Knight. If you ever saw that movie, in the opening scene of the movie, there's 4 robbers. The Joker is one of those robbers. He has convinced each of the other robbers that they should kill each other. So remember, if there's 4 robbers, that's 25% each of the takings from the robbery. If there's 3 robbers, it's 33% each. If there's 2 robbers, it's 50% each. And if there's 1 robber, at the end of that scene, you have the Joker gets the entire 100% of the winnings from the robbery. Okay. And he drives off in the bus. You might remember that movie, The Dark Knight, that opening scene of the pirate puzzle. So therefore, Abraham basically saying to himself, well, I'm better off even if I get $1 compared to getting $0. And that's the idea of the pirate puzzle there. You could do this other little game with your children or your nieces or nephews, and that's the egg hunt game, where you tell them that you've hidden 12 chocolate eggs in the garden, but only hide 11. And watch how the children will run around that garden. And even the fastest child that has collected 5 chocolate eggs will still keep running around that garden, trying to get that elusive 12th egg. Put that into a business context. Do you waste resources? Do you waste valuable resources trying to increase your market share by another 1%, when in fact you should be like the child, that you're satisfied with the five eggs you have? Now you can sit down and enjoy the benefit of eating those five eggs. Or do you exhaust a lot of your resources, a lot of your energy, and let the child run around for that elusive 12th egg? You're tired, you've wasted a lot of energy, and you don't even have enough energy then to enjoy the five eggs that you have gathered because you're the fastest runner of all the children in the group. So think of that from a business context. Maybe sometimes you're better to consolidate your existing market share, to defend your existing market share, rather than necessarily all the time being tried to use up scarce resources, use up managerial skills, employee skills, etc., to grow the organization and growing the organization that might lead to less and less profit. There's no point really growing your organization if your profit level is on a downward trajectory. The other big area that we look at in trying to understand competitive advantage and sustainable competitive advantage is the resource-based view of the firm, which is now fairly common in the whole area of strategic management. You probably have come across, like Porter's five force analysis, where he's looking at the five forces in order to determine, whether an industry is attractive or not to invest in. The only problem with Porter's five force analysis, it purely is looking at the external environment, whereas the resource based view looks at the internal environment. It looks at your internal resources, your internal capabilities, in order to see how you can leverage those internal resources, those internal capabilities, in order to ensure you have a sustained competitive advantage, competitive edge against your rival players. So maybe Apple's success since the early 2000s is the fact that you have seen Apple evolve from a computer company to looking more at its core capabilities of product design, etc. So if you have an Apple product, you will see at the back of your Apple product, designed in California, assembled in China, or assembled in Vietnam. Apple is saying that other companies like Foxconn can assemble their products more efficiently than Apple can do it itself. And what Apple has decided, rather than waste a lot of its resources in assembly areas, manufacturing areas where it knows it doesn't have that competitive edge, it focuses its resources, its allocation resources, in what it knows is its core resources and core competencies around design, developing integrated ecosystems, developing its own chips, silicon chips, etc. So what we do here in strategy and competition, we look internally into various organizations, and you should look internally into your own organization. And what do you think are the resources, the capabilities that you can leverage that will give you a greater competitive edge vis-a-vis your competitors? Some of these resources are tangible resources. Maybe you have sufficient cash reserves. They could be physical resources like the plant equipment. If you take Apple, for example, it's having physical resources like the Apple stores does give it a competitive edge compared to some other players. Um, Intangible resources like your patent, your copyright, your brand equity that's associated with Apple or Starbucks or Adidas products, and then your human resources and how much you invest in your human resources, the skill set of your human resources, your engineers, your software developers, etc. And then your capabilities, your competencies is how you can take those resources and you can execute those resources and deploy them and integrate them in order to ensure that you are maximizing the competitive advantage of your organization. So look at Apple in terms of its product design, look at the seamless integration across its products and services in terms of its integrated ecosystem. Similarly, you can look at Starbucks Trier Center, which is a massive innovation hub where it's innovating new products, new processes in order to bring all of these new products, new processes to its various stores to give it a competitive advantage over other competitors in that particular market segment. Okay, so we what we do here, we use a tool called Barney's V-Rio model, and we look at the idea of V-Rio stands for value. Does the resource or capability provide value to customers or help the organization to exploit its opportunities? How rare is the resource or capability? Imitatability, is the resource costly for others to imitate or not? And then how well does the organization organize the resources and capabilities through its processes, through its culture, through its overall structure? So, for example, I'm only giving this for purely demonstration purposes, but in strategy and competition, as part of the course, and especially during the workshops, students in the various groups will take the V-Rio model, and first of all, they'll apply it to their own organization, and then they'll apply it to organizations that they are given, like Apple, Starbucks, Adidas, Volkswagen, Tesla, etc. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to identify the unique resources, capabilities that they perceive give uh, an added sustained competitive advantage across the Rio's model of valuable, rare, costly to imitate, and organize. And if you can get yeses across all of these, then you have a sustainable competitive advantage vis-a-vis your other competitors. If you're getting no in some of these boxes here, then you might only have a temporary competitive advantage, and therefore you have to begin to look at some of your price strategies and some of your non-price strategies to see how no can be converted to yes. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to leave you with a question. What are the internal resources and capabilities of your organization that you believe you can leverage to achieve and sustain a competitive advantage? And in order to help you answer that question, you need to conduct a Barney V Rio model analysis to help you answer that question. And if you're doing the MBA program, that's what exactly you will be doing in one of the modules, Strategy and Competition, Part A, doing a whole strategic analysis of price and non-price strategies and seeing the impact of these strategies on, first of all, establishing, secondly, sustaining your competitive advantage. So hopefully I've given you a flavor and some things to think about that you can bring back to your own organization and try to think about some of these things and think about that elevator pitch. What makes you different? What makes your product or service different? And how can you establish, more so, how can you sustain a competitive advantage for your product or service within whatever market environment that you operate? So I'm thank you very much for attending today's webinar. I hopefully you enjoyed it, and I'm open to questions and answers. And back to Justin.
Well, Professor, we have a question from Jose Colmenares. He asked if, in a highly uncertain environment like Venezuela, do you think this strategic approach can still be applied effectively?
Yes, and equally in the Middle East at the moment, where we have a significant disruption to supplies and the impact on the supply chain, and we applied it very much so also in COVID-19, where there was equally a significant impact on supply chain. So we do apply it across different market environments and market environments that exhibit, like Venezuela, that exhibit significant constraints in terms of resources, efficiencies, etc. And if Justin, if you look even at COVID-19, look at how a number of companies, global companies like Adidas, Nike, Starbucks, have evolved their business strategies. Look at even Starbucks, how Starbucks, remember, pitched itself on being the third place. You went home, you went to the office, or you went to Starbucks. But after COVID, began to change. Their behavior began to change. People would simply wanted to grab that quick cup of coffee. But Starbucks, remember, had no online delivery services. It had no online payment services. It had no drive-throughs. Look at now how Starbucks has evolved since COVID to meet the changing consumer behavior needs as well.
All right, good. There's a question there from Matlock. Is this approach will be shared to the participants? For everybody's information, Paul Patton is one of our professor, primarily to strategic and competition, one of the core classes of the University of Manchester MBA. If you want to learn more about the approach and how this module are being thought, of course, we welcome you to join the University of Manchester MBA program. Another question here about Professor Paul. To what extent should leaders rely on data versus instinct when making strategic decisions?
Well, data and the analysis of data can give you significant strategic insights into how well your business is doing or not doing. So, leaders in any organization should always look at data as a key information resource, data analytics. And you can see that in the big data, how social media even use data about your social media activity, and then using that data in order to target certain products or services to you. Just think of your social graph. Every time you go on to a website and you click yes, you're leaving a footprint behind you, your social graph. And suddenly you will get all of these messages or advertisements because you have liked a certain product or certain service. Now, leader's instinct is also important because sometimes you have to be very much aware about your local customer needs as well. So a combination of data analytics and savvy, as we might call it being savvy as well, is equally important.
All right, thanks for that. We encourage everybody to ask questions, please. We would love to answer that for you. Another question here, Professor. In oligopoly competition, price war, all will lose, and it's always the market leader's decision. In PlayStation example, why did Sony reduce its prices, although it was always the market leader?
Well, I suppose you have a new entrant coming into the market, and Sony felt that if it could reduce its prices and sustain the losses due to those lowest prices, it would make it unattractive for Microsoft, the new entrant, to remain within that market. And you get that a lot in airline industries where you might get basically the idea of penetration pricing, where a new entrant comes in, the established airlines will drop their prices to make it unprofitable for the new entrants and force those new entrants out of the market. So that's maybe what was the basis behind Sony's thinking. But Sony forgot that Microsoft is not just a small new entrant. Microsoft is a large player, has large cash reserves from other divisions, and you would probably see if did more analysis there that there was cross subsidization across some of its products, that it could afford to make losses initially on the Xbox because of making huge profits on other parts of its divisions.
All right, follow-up question from Mutlak. One more question. How this strategy approach will be effective for a non-profit organization?
Well, again, not slightly different because if you're non-profit, then you still have to make a break-even point. You still have to break even. So, from a strategy and competition point of view, you still need to know what constitutes your revenue, what makes up your revenue, because total revenue is technically the price you charge multiplied by your sales. And then what makes up your costs. So in strategy and competition, in some of the topics, we also focus in on revenue, on cost, etc. Because even if you're non-profit making, you still have to break even. So you still have to have a knowledge of different price strategies and different non-price strategies in order to get to that break-even point.
All right. Another question from Praveen. What's your take on highly commoditized products where there is no scope for price competition and product differentiation? Is it only about efficiency?
Well, where there is scenarios where price competition is not going to operate, then a lot of companies rely on non-price competition. So if you think of Starbucks as an example, when McCafe came in as a new entrant into McCafe owned by McDonald's, when it came in as a new entrant into the coffee market, let's say that Starbucks was charging $5 and McCafe was charging $3. What did Starbucks do? It did not reduce the price of Starbucks coffee to $3. It left its price at $5. It didn't compete on prices. However, what Starbucks did, they looked at their overall portfolio and they had in their portfolio another company called Seattle Best Coffee. Seattle Best Coffee was a cheaper brand. Now, how will Seattle Best Coffee, owned by Starbucks, compete now with McCafe? What happens was that Seattle Best Coffee did a partnership with Burger King. And who does Burger King compete against? It competes against McDonald's, McCafe. So sometimes price competition isn't within your arsenal to use, and you don't want to use it. Because remember, if there is another principle within economics called the total revenue test, you should never consider reducing the price for an inelastic product, a product that has inelastic demand, because you will lose revenue. So Starbucks would see its coffee as a premium brand, inelastic demand. If it reduces the price, it's going to lose revenue. So price is not an option in some scenarios. Hence, that's why a lot of companies, like Apple is another example. Apple does not want to reduce the price of its products, inelastic products, lose revenue. Why would it do that? Well, we still compete, but we'll use non-price strategies.
All right, thanks for that, Professor Paul. A few more questions here. It will be helpful if you can suggest some core readings that are important for your core class. I'm not sure if you can give much of those details, but yeah, if you can give
Yeah,
some
but
sort of
I
example.
suppose there's two very good textbooks. And the first textbook is Strategy and Competition by Besanko, Besanko, and another book is Decoding Strategy by McNulty. Decoding Strategy, very nice book, giving you insights on how you look at strategy and how you go about decoding that strategy, understanding strategy, because you need to understand your competitors in order to ensure that you are implementing the correct strategies.
All right, thanks for that, Professor Paul. Um, how can companies build resilient strategies when supply chains are heavily impacted during this geopolitical situation we're facing? If you have some comments for that, sir.
Yeah, well, I suppose there's a famous Japanese saying, Kaizen, Kaizen, continuous improvement. And with the current situation in the Middle East and impacts on supply chains, the same happened in COVID, major impact on supply chains. one had to always reevaluate your business strategies. So, for example, some companies like Hugo Boss move production facilities back from Asia back into Europe, etc. Uh, on the other hand, as I said earlier, the likes of Starbucks changed their business model, starting to introduce online payments, online delivery, uh, drive-throughs in Starbucks, etc. So one really has to start evaluating everything that you're currently doing and always continually strive for continuous improvement in what you're doing in the face of the major constraints we all face now in the supply chain.
All right. And a couple more here, Professor. How would you evaluate the 80-20 rule or the Pareto principle in automotive market? What's the proper decision making theory for this?
The 80-20 rule in the
In automotive market, what is the proper decision making theory?
what is that relating to? Could I ask the person asking the question, what is it relating to? Is there any particular example?
No, not really, sir. You just said that what will be the decision making theory for that on how you evaluate the 80-20 rule in the automotive market.
Um, well, again, I've only given you a flavor of some theories and some frameworks here. There's a lot more theories and frameworks when you do strategy and competitions, a lot more theories and frameworks that we would develop. I only give you a flavor here. I didn't go through the Porter five forces type of analysis. I just give you a flavor of game theory, give you a flavor of the resource-based view of the firm. So there's several other theories then that we would develop in strategy and competition that would give a much wider brief in terms of strategy and competition.
All right, good. What should organizations focus on when rebuilding or re-entering markets after this conflict?
Um, I suppose again, one is looking at the various markets in which you are currently maybe supplying your product or service, looking at the various constraints within those markets, how much the market has evolved or changed. So, for example, if you were if you were getting a lot of your supplies from a particular market at a certain price, let's say X, and now you're getting those supplies at X plus Y percent, and the Y percent is a 10% additional cost on your supplies, that's going to have a quite negative impact on your bottom line, on your profits, on your financial performance. So you're really going to have to assess all the markets again to determine what is the impacts of, unfortunately, this disruption in the global trade that's happening at the moment. And then you may decide to change your business model, the same as the likes of Adidas and Nike, Starbucks decide to change their business model after COVID as well. And you may have to basically look at maybe local markets in order to source some of these supplies cheaper compared to your traditional markets that you were using maybe before the crisis.
We have a lot of questions here, Professor Paul, but we can only accommodate two more because of our time. Last two questions. Do you think transnational strategies will undergo a major changes in the global order, which are yet to unfold?
Yes, unfortunately, if I could just say geopolitics. The geopolitics is upending a significant amount of international trade, as we know, especially with the tariffs being imposed by the American Trump administration and the volatility that's coming and the impact that is all happening on international trade. So there's no doubt about it. And if you even look at the moment, if you're Huawei in the smartphone market, you can't even enter or sell your products within the USA market at the moment. So a huge market is not available to you. because of the geopolitics that is happening, unfortunately.
Thank you again, Professor Paul. One more question. I would love to accommodate your question, but later on, if you wish to have more questions for us, you can use the chat box for those questions. We will try to come back to that for you guys. Now, last question, sir. How do you see strategic decision making evolving over the next 5 to 10 years, Professor Paul?
Well, if I had a magic ball that I could look into, it would be great. But as definitely there's going to be a lot of volatility in the markets, even if the war, the U.S. Israeli Iran war was to stop tomorrow morning. It's going to take weeks, if not months, maybe years, in order for a lot of the uh, supply chain lines to come back on stream. Not only you have the problems with the supply chain through the Strait of Hormuz, but even through the Red Sea. Look at the impact the Red Sea and the fact that ships have to try to avoid and the increased transportation costs. I'm not sure. Well, I'm sure some people here in the webinar in their business organization, if you ask your financial controller, I'm sure they will say that the cost of transportation has significantly increased. So there will be increases in that in the future. However, a lot of companies need to start looking at alternative sources of energy, maybe solar power energy, wind energy, in order to try to support the reduction in those significant material costs. So there will be volatility for a period of time, but who knows what the next number of years will unfold with changes in the geopolitics, you know.
All right. Thank you once again, Professor Paul Patton.
You're
We
welcome.
appreciate this. We will come back to you later on just to say the goodbye to everybody. But before we conclude the night, I would like to invite you in this upcoming events. If you want to learn more about the University of Manchester Dubai Masterclass series, we would love to welcome you once again. Tomorrow we'll be having the Meet the Academics, of course. We'll be meeting some of the professors of the University of Manchester Dubai. If so, some of you here are already a student or an alumni, please join us for that. And if you want to learn more about some of our, I would say, teaser courses, you get to meet Dr. Reza, of course, talking about AI and algorithms on April 23rd. Please scan the QR code if you're interested. I'll be at 7 p.m. And of course, negotiation skills. One of the I would say an elective that highly everybody wants to pursue doing. You can also scan the QR code. That will be happening on April 30th. So please join us. Scan the QR code for more information. Now, also, if some of you would like to do the MBA with us, of course, and you are a student currently, an alumni, or just someone that someone knows about someone, you can also refer a friend with the University of Manchester, and of course, you'll be rewarded with some gifts, of course, and 10% discount on their tuition fee for those who refer. If you want to know more information too of our socials, and please scan the QR code from Facebook down to LinkedIn. You get to learn a lot of things in our socials when it comes to the University of Manchester upcoming events, particularly, especially in the upcoming months to go. And please review us in Google if you get to have the time. Once again, thank you, Professor Paul Patton, for this engaging and informative session. We hope to see you, sir, here back in the Middle East, Professor.
Look
And
forward to it.
and as we come to an end of this session, one thing becomes clear: strategy it's not just about competition, it's about connection. The best decisions are not made in isolation, they are shaped by different perspective, by collaboration, and by the courage to think differently. At the University of Manchester, these ideas comes to life, bringing together people, insight, and experiences that challenge the way we see the world. Because in a world of constant change, Your greatest advantage is not just what you know, it's how you think, how you adapt, and how you work with others. Stronger ideas, stronger network, stronger impact, stronger together. On behalf of our founding director, Randa Besizo, and of course, my colleague Gusam, who have helped me today, and the amazing University of Manchester Dubai team who made all this possible, my name is Joseph Ranyola. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Always be safe, and until then, masalama, everyone. Goodbye.